What if everything you believe to be true about yourself is just an illusion? Think about it. Your name, your memories, even the self you fiercely defend, might just be stories your mind tells you. But what if I told you that you were never born, and therefore, you will never die? Yes, it sounds absurd at first, but there's something profoundly powerful in this paradox that few dare to explore. What you think is the truth about your identity could be the greatest cosmic misunderstanding. After all, who are you beyond the clothes you wear, the ideas you defend, or the achievements you accumulate? Rumi once said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a single drop." But do we live as if that's true? What if the freedom you've been seeking has been here all along, hidden behind the idea that you need to be someone? Today, we're going to challenge everything you think you know about who you are. Get ready for a journey of questioning. This video isn't for those who prefer ready-made answers, but for the brave who dare to dive into the depths of consciousness. The question is, are you ready to abandon the idea of being someone? By the end, you might discover something that completely transforms your perspective on life. And who knows, you might finally find the freedom that has always been within your reach. So, take a deep breath and come with me. Let's dismantle the puzzle of the ego, explore the mysteries of identity, and question what it truly means to be alive. If everything you know was challenged, what would remain? Perhaps the greatest discovery will be realizing that, at your core, you were never separate from the whole. Have you noticed how the ego loves playing the role of commander? It creates the illusion that we can control everything, from the tiniest details of our routines to the major twists and turns of life. But as Alan Watts once said, life is not a struggle but a flow. The desire for control is a form of resistance to the fluid and unpredictable nature of reality. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. The fear of uncertainty fuels the ego. It convinces us that if we don't know what's coming next, we're in danger. Yet, as Laozi said, water, though soft, overcomes even the hardest stone because it flows without resistance. Embracing the unknown invites us to trust that life knows what it's doing. Reflect on this. How many times has something uncertain turned out better than you planned? Freeing yourself from the illusion of control starts with small steps. Instead of trying to control a conversation or outcome, why not simply listen and observe? Eckhart Tolle suggests that by focusing on the present moment, we dissolve the need to control the future. For example, when a plan doesn't go as expected, pause and ask, what am I trying to control? What if I just accepted what is? Control is a trap that makes us believe we're safe, but in truth, it keeps us imprisoned. Rumi once said, "The wound is where the light enters." When we accept impermanence, we realize that security was never in our hands. Try starting your day without a rigid schedule. Leave room for spontaneity and see how life can surprise you. Philosopher John Wheeler, a proponent of non-duality, suggests that the self trying to control is merely a narrative. He says, "You are not the author but the space where the story unfolds." When we grasp this, the weight of trying to manipulate every detail lifts. What if, instead of fighting the current, you allowed yourself to flow with the natural rhythm of life? Try delegating or letting go of something you usually try to control. Modern neuroscience supports this idea. Studies show that our brain creates the illusion of control to reduce anxiety. However, when we accept what we can't change, we tap into a deeper sense of peace. Spend 5 minutes at the end of each day reflecting, what flowed effortlessly today? Where was control unnecessary? This simple practice can transform your relationship with the unknown. If life is an ocean, control is like trying to hold onto a wave. Laozi reminds us that true wisdom lies in flowing, not resisting. When faced with the unexpected, ask yourself, am I trying to control the inevitable? What if I trusted the process? This shift in perspective not only eases the burden, but also opens space for solutions the ego could never imagine. When we let go of control, we find something surprising: the freedom to simply be. It's a feeling of lightness that connects us to the present moment, where fear of uncertainty disappears. But if control is just one of the ego's many masks, what else is it trying to hide? This question leads us to the next step: deconstructing the ego itself and its central narrative. Who are you beyond the stories you tell about yourself? This question, while seemingly simple, holds the power to dismantle the structure we call the ego. The ego is like a narrator, insisting that you are your achievements, your fears, and even your failures. Alan Watts once said, "What you call I is just an idea sustained by the mind." But what if this I is merely an illusion we construct to feel secure? The ego acts as a mask we wear to navigate the world, but over time, we confuse it with who we truly are. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe our identity is tied to what we do, what we own, or what others think of us. Nisargadatta Maharaj once said, "You are not the body or the mind. You are the consciousness in which all of this arises." Questioning this narrative is like peeling away layers of an onion, going deeper to uncover the core of who you are. A practical way to deconstruct the ego is to examine moments when you feel offended or upset. Ask yourself, who is really offended here? Is it my true self or the idea I've created of myself? Rumi once said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop." When we recognize that we are much more than this narrative, we begin to dissolve the separation between who we think we are and who we truly are. The ego thrives on comparison. It feels big when it judges others as smaller, and small when it measures itself against something greater. Eckhart Tolle encourages observing these thoughts with curiosity rather than accepting them as truths. He says, "The awareness that you are not your thoughts is the beginning of freedom." Try this in practice. When you catch yourself comparing, pause and ask, is this reflecting my essence or just a story from the ego? In the context of non-duality, John Wheeler describes the ego as just a concept, a narrative creating the illusion of separation. When you look inward and try to locate the I, what do you find? Often, nothing but floating thoughts and memories. This realization can be liberating. It reminds us that we don't need to carry the weight of maintaining a fixed identity. We can simply be, without justification. Modern neuroscience supports this perspective, suggesting that the self is a mental construct the brain uses to organize experiences. It's like watching a movie. You are the screen on which the images appear, not the main character. Next time you feel anxious or fearful, try visualizing those feelings as waves rising and falling in the vast ocean of your consciousness. This can bring immediate peace. In Buddhism, the concept of anatta, non-self, teaches that the self is a transient illusion, a flow of ever-changing experiences. Laozi, in Taoism, reinforces this idea. The human being is like water, adapting to the flow of life. Embracing this fluidity dissolves the need to cling to a fixed identity. Why not start your day by saying, "Today, I will be like water"? This simple intention can transform how you interact with the world. When we begin to question the ego, we lose nothing. In fact, we gain everything. Rumi said it best, When you let go of what you think you are, you discover what you have always been. So, what happens when you stop believing in the ego's story? This opens the door to understanding how the collective also shapes your sense of self. After all, if the individual ego is a narrative, what about the social influences that reinforce this illusion? Have you ever thought about how much your identity is shaped by society? From the moment we are born, we are immersed in a web of social expectations that begin to form what we call the self. John Wheeler once said, "What you think you are is largely a reflection of the stories around you." We're taught to identify with labels, profession, nationality, gender, but are we merely these imposed layers? The collective ego operates like an invisible mold, creating patterns we follow almost unconsciously. Alan Watts described this as cultural hypnosis, where we accept what we're told without question. For instance, how often have you chosen something because it was expected by society, rather than because it reflected your genuine desire? The collective ego tells us who we should be, but breaking free from this requires the courage to ask, is this my truth or just convention? The need to belong is one of the main forces that fuel the collective ego. Rumi said, "You were shaped by those who came before you, but what is within you is eternal." This desire for acceptance often leads us to follow paths that don't reflect our essence. Try observing your choices and ask, am I doing this to fit in, or because it's what I truly want? This reflection can bring clarity. Pressure to conform is also reinforced by media, educational systems, and even family traditions. Eckhart Tolle suggests these influences create noise that disconnects us from the present moment. He says, the more you identify with the external, the further you are from the internal. A useful practice is to unplug from social media for a while and tune into your inner silence. It's in this quiet space that authenticity emerges. In Buddhism, the concept of interdependence teaches that no one exists in isolation, but this doesn't mean we must lose ourselves in external expectations. Laozi said, "The wise live in the world but are not shaped by it." Balancing being in the world without being controlled by it is an art that takes practice. Why not try saying no to something you feel is imposed on you? The collective ego is not something to fight against, but to understand. John Wheeler reminds us, society doesn't create the true you, it creates a character. When you realize this, you see that you can rewrite the script at any time. Try this simple experiment. List 3 beliefs you've inherited from society and question them. This practice may reveal how much of your life is shaped by external expectations. Breaking free from the collective ego is an invitation to authenticity. It doesn't mean rejecting everything society offers, but consciously choosing what aligns with your essence. Alan Watts once said, "Being yourself in a world that wants you to be something else is the greatest achievement." And when you start living this way, something magical happens. You find peace in being who you truly are. But if the collective ego so strongly shapes our perception, how can we use this understanding to see beyond the masks? This leads us to explore powerful tools like metaphors, which make deeper concepts about the self and the whole more accessible. After all, there's something liberating about realizing we are like waves belonging to an infinite ocean. Metaphors are windows that help us see the invisible. Imagine the metaphor of the ocean and its waves. Each wave seems individual, unique, but it's never separate from the infinite ocean. This image, popularized by John Wheeler, perfectly illustrates how the self is just a temporary manifestation of a greater consciousness. Just as a wave cannot exist apart from the ocean, we have never been separate from the whole. Alan Watts expanded on this idea by saying life is like a dance. There's no endpoint we need to reach. The goal is to be in harmony with the flow. Think of the times you've fought against the tides of life, only to realize that when you let go, everything began to flow effortlessly. Metaphors show us that separation is an illusion, and that freedom lies in accepting our connection to the infinite. Rumi, with his poetic wisdom, offered another powerful metaphor. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop. This reminds us that, although we may seem small, we carry the vastness of the universe within us. Try meditating on this. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself as a drop returning to the ocean, dissolving into its vastness. It's a simple practice, but it can transform your perception. The metaphor of the ocean also helps us see emotions and thoughts as passing waves. Eckhart Tolle suggests that by observing our thoughts without identifying with them, we can experience peace. Picture your thoughts as waves that rise, crest, and fade. You don't need to control them, just observe their flow. This dissolves identification with the ego and creates space for inner silence. In Buddhism, the image of a cloud in the sky is used to describe impermanence. Just as a cloud seems solid but eventually dissipates, the self is a temporary formation. Laozi, in Taoism, reinforces this with a metaphor of water. Fluid, adaptable, and yet strong enough to shape rocks. What if you approached challenges by flowing like water, not resisting but adapting instead? Metaphors also serve as powerful tools to connect philosophical concepts with everyday experiences. For example, imagine your life as a river. You can try to swim against the current or allow yourself to be carried by the natural flow. This practice not only reduces stress, but also connects you to the idea that everything in life has its own rhythm. When you stop resisting, you realize the river always knew the way. John Wheeler once said, "The space where everything happens is untouched by the changes within it." This metaphor of the screen and the images projected onto it reminds us that our essence, our consciousness, remains unchanged, even when life feels chaotic. Try this. In a moment of tension, imagine that you are the screen and the events are just passing projections. This perspective brings immediate lightness. Using these metaphors, we begin to understand that we are not what happens to us, but the awareness in which everything happens. Metaphors help translate complex ideas into something we can feel and apply in our daily lives. But if we are like waves in the ocean or clouds in the sky, what happens when we recognize that separation is just a myth? This brings us to explore the narrative of unity, where the infinite reveals itself. Imagine a vast, boundless ocean. Every wave that rises and falls is like a thought, an emotion, or an experience that comes and goes, but the ocean itself remains unchanged. This narrative of the infinite ocean, embraced by John Wheeler and Alan Watts, teaches us that separation is an illusion. Just as the wave is never separate from the ocean, we too have never been apart from universal consciousness. The feeling of separation arises from identifying with form, with the temporary. Rumi once said, "You have never been a drop. You have always been the ocean." This dismantles the belief that we are small, isolated entities, revealing instead that we are part of something vast and eternal. Consider this. How does your perspective shift when you begin to see yourself as part of an infinite whole? Eckhart Tolle describes this narrative as an invitation to presence. He says, "When you realize you are the ocean, fear disappears. After all, what does a wave have to lose when it knows it is the ocean itself?" The next time you feel anxious or afraid, imagine yourself dissolving into something greater, like a drop returning to the sea. It's a simple exercise, but one that can profoundly change your perspective. In Buddhism, The metaphor of the ocean often appears, particularly in the idea that waves are temporary manifestations of the mind. Thoughts come and go like waves, but the ocean of consciousness remains untouched. Laozi reinforces this in Taoism, saying, "True strength lies in flexibility, just as water shapes the world without ever resisting." What happens when you stop resisting and start flowing? The infinite ocean teaches us about impermanence. Just as no wave is permanent, our emotions and experiences are also transient. This is not something to fear, but to celebrate. When we understand that everything passes, the pressure to hold on or control life dissolves. Try this today. In moments of challenge, ask yourself, does this wave define the ocean, or is it simply part of it? This narrative also invites us to recognize our connection to everything around us. We are not just one wave among many. We are the same ocean that moves all waves. Rumi once said, "When you see the other as part of yourself, separation disappears." The next time you interact with someone, try to see the shared essence between you. This can transform even the most difficult relationships. John Wheeler highlighted that this vision dissolves the ego. He said, "What you think is a separate entity is just the movement of the whole." When we let go of the idea of being an isolated I, we discover a freedom we never imagined. Try meditating with the image of the ocean, visualizing yourself as part of the infinite. This can evoke a profound sense of belonging. But if the ocean represents unity and consciousness, what happens when we quiet ourselves to truly feel it? That is the key to the next step, exploring inner silence. In the end, it is in silence that the infinite ocean reveals its true nature, calm, vast, and free from separation. Inner silence is like a pause in the middle of a melody. It not only connects the notes, but also reveals the depth that exists beyond sound. Similarly, the silence within you is where your true essence can be found, free from the constant chatter of the mind. John Wheeler said, "In the space of silence, you discover what you have always been." What if this space were more real than the thoughts that occupy it? Alan Watts compared the mind to a restless lake. When the waters are turbulent, it's impossible to see the bottom. But when they calm, clarity emerges. Inner silence works the same way. It's the space where the ego loses its grip, and you begin to realize that you are not your thoughts. Try sitting quietly for a few minutes, simply observing your breath. In that emptiness, peace arises. Eckhart Tolle calls silence effortless presence. He explains that when we stop struggling against the mind and simply observe it, we connect with pure consciousness. Imagine standing in the middle of a forest, listening to the sound of the wind through the trees. In that moment, your mind doesn't need to say anything. It's simply present. This state of mindfulness is the gateway to inner silence. Rumi poetically stated, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." This invites us to dive into our own quietude, free from labels and explanations. The next time you feel lost or overwhelmed, close your eyes and ask, "What is here beyond my thoughts?" You'll find that silence isn't empty but full of life. In Buddhism, silence is likened to the sky, which remains untouched by passing clouds. Laozi, in Taoism, said, "The strongest sound is the one that makes no noise." These metaphors remind us that silence is not an absence, but a vibrant presence. Dedicate 5 minutes a day to simply observing what arises when you stop trying to control the mind. Silence also has the power to dissolve the illusion of separation. When we connect with it, we see that we are not isolated individuals, but part of something much greater. Imagine silence as the ocean and your thoughts as passing waves. What remains constant is the space where everything unfolds. This is the essence of consciousness, timeless, infinite, and free. In silence, you discover that the mind is just a tool, not who you are. John Wheeler said, "The mind is like an actor on the stage. Silence is the stage itself." This perspective completely changes our relationship with thoughts. The next time your mind feels hyperactive, try seeing it as a play you're simply watching. This immediately brings a sense of lightness. But if silence is where we find our essence, what happens when we bring this awareness into our daily interactions? This naturally leads to the next step, exploring detachment. Because, ultimately, it's in silence that we learn to let go of what we are not and open ourselves to the freedom of simply being. Detachment is one of the most liberating practices we can cultivate, yet it's often misunderstood. It's not about giving up everything or isolating yourself from the world, but about releasing the weight we carry by identifying with what we own, do, or think we are. Alan Watts said, "You lose nothing by letting go. You only stop clinging to what was never yours." What if this weight were nothing but an illusion? When we cling to the idea of being someone, we create a barrier against life's natural flow. Rumi said, "Don't be content to be a drop. Discover that you are the ocean." This phrase challenges us to leave behind the ego's limitations, which define us by titles or stories. Try asking yourself, who am I without these labels? What remains when I let go of this narrative? Detachment teaches us that nothing we possess or identify with on a material level is permanent. In Taoism, Laozi said, "Holding on is losing, letting go is gaining." This wisdom reminds us that control and attachment are sources of suffering. Think about something you feel you need to be happy. Now imagine releasing that need. This doesn't mean losing it, but creating space for something greater. Eckhart Tolle describes detachment as a portal to the present moment. He suggests that by releasing the need to control the future or cling to the past, we find peace in the now. A simple exercise is to focus on an object you value deeply and ask, if this disappeared, who would I be? This question may feel uncomfortable, but it's profoundly transformative. In Buddhism, detachment is rooted in the concept of anatta, non-self, which invites us to let go not only of material objects but also of ideas and emotions that imprison us. John Wheeler said, "You are the screen on which everything appears, but nothing belongs to it." The next time a negative emotion arises, try observing it as something passing rather than something that defines you. Detachment isn't about indifference. It's about freedom. Imagine holding a handful of sand. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. Letting go is trusting that what's essential will remain while what isn't will dissolve. Rumi said, "Life is a balance between holding on and letting go." Try applying this to a relationship by releasing expectations and simply being present. Detachment also means recognizing that we don't need to be anything to be everything. Alan Watts said, "You are complete just as you are." This idea challenges the ego, which constantly seeks external validation. Why not start your day by saying, "Today, I choose to simply be without needing to be something specific"? This intention can transform how you feel about yourself. But what happens when we apply detachment to our sense of separation? The next step is understanding that by letting go of the idea of being separate, we discover our interconnectedness with everything. In the end, true detachment leads us to realize that we have never been alone. We have always been part of the whole. Have you ever felt disconnected, as though you were navigating alone in a vast ocean? This sense of separation is one of the greatest illusions created by the ego. John Wheeler reminds us, the idea of a separate self is just a story we tell ourselves. The truth is, like waves in an ocean, we are all interconnected. There is no you and me, only the whole manifesting in unique ways. Rumi expressed this beautifully. There is no I and you. There is only we. When we see others as part of ourselves, something magical happens. Separation dissolves, making way for profound empathy. Imagine interacting with someone, even during conflict, while recognizing that you share the same essence. This changes the dynamic, allowing you to respond with compassion instead of reactivity. In Buddhism, the concept of interdependence teaches that nothing exists in isolation. Even the smallest act impacts the whole. Laozi, in Taoism, adds, when you see the world in yourself, you become part of everything. Try this practice in your daily life. During a conversation, look beyond the words and feel the connection between you and the other person. This simple shift can transform relationships. Eckhart Tolle suggests that true connection arises when we are present. He says, when you are fully here, separation disappears. Think of moments when you've been completely present with someone, perhaps sharing a laugh or a comfortable silence. In those moments, the ego steps back, and unity is revealed. Practice this today. Choose an interaction to be fully present, free from distractions. Modern neuroscience supports this idea. Studies show that our brains are wired for connection. When we feel part of a group or something greater, our sense of well-being increases. This explains why simple acts of kindness, like helping a stranger, make us feel so good. Try this. Perform an act of kindness today without expecting anything in return, and notice how it connects you to the whole. Connection with others also reflects our connection with nature. Rumi said, "You are not separate from the earth you walk on. It is part of you." Imagine seeing a tree not as something external, but as an extension of the same life force flowing through you. This reminds us that separation isn't real. It's just a story we've created. Spend time in nature today and feel yourself as part of it. When we realize that separation is an illusion, our sense of purpose shifts. It's no longer me against the world, but we as the world. Alan Watts said, "You are the universe experiencing itself." Reflect on this. How does your life change when you see yourself as part of something greater? This perspective not only brings peace, but also a profound sense of belonging. By dissolving separation, we find that the freedom we seek has always been in recognizing our unity. But what about the wisdom and insights that help us understand this more deeply? In the next step, we'll explore how great traditions and thinkers offer valuable tools to integrate this connection with the whole into our daily lives. Throughout history, great masters and thinkers have left us a treasure trove of wisdom to help us understand who we truly are. Alan Watts, for example, challenged the notion of separation by saying, "You are not a person. You are the universe expressing itself as a person for a while." This perspective reminds us that the self we cling to is merely a fragment of a greater consciousness. Imagine the liberation of seeing yourself as part of the infinite. Nisargadatta Maharaj, a revered teacher of Advaita Vedanta, emphasized consciousness as our true nature. He said, "You are not the body, nor the mind. You are the awareness in which all experiences arise." This invites us to question our identifications and explore the vastness beyond form. Reflect on this. What remains when you let go of everything transient? Rumi, the mystic poet, centered his teachings on unity. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop, he proclaimed. This metaphor encapsulates the idea that, while we may appear small, we contain the fullness of existence within us. Consider using this metaphor as a daily reminder. Whenever doubt arises, repeat to yourself, "I am the ocean." Eckhart Tolle brought this ancient wisdom into the modern context by identifying the ego as the root of suffering. He said, "The ego is just a thought you've identified with." Recognizing this changes our relationship with thoughts and frees us from unnecessary burdens. Practice this by observing your mind as if you were watching a movie, detaching from its stories. In Buddhism, the concept of anatta, non-self, teaches that the self is a temporary construct. Like bubbles on water, our identities constantly shift. Laozi, in Taoism, echoed this by saying, "When you realize that nothing is missing, the whole world belongs to you." This reminds us that fulfillment doesn't come from external achievements, but from recognizing our innate completeness. Modern neuroscience also aligns with these teachings. Researchers like Sam Harris explain that the sense of a separate self is a mental construct created by the brain to organize experiences. Understanding this allows us to see the self as a functional tool, not an ultimate truth. Ask yourself, who am I beyond the story my mind creates? All these traditions converge on one truth. We are limitless awareness, timeless and interconnected. Alan Watts beautifully summarized it. The only thing we truly know is that we are here now. This invites us to embrace presence and live fully in the moment, free from distractions of past or future. These teachings are not just intellectual concepts, but invitations to experience life more profoundly. Imagine living with the ease of knowing you don't need to protect or defend a fragile sense of self. What changes when you approach life from this perspective? But integrating these insights into daily life requires practice. Let's explore how to embody this wisdom, step by step, in our everyday interactions and experiences. Now that you've journeyed through these ideas, the question remains, what will you do with this understanding? Everything we've explored, the illusion of ego, the connection to the whole, the vastness of the ocean within you, is more than just a collection of ideas. It's a key to unlocking a freer, lighter, and more connected life. So, what's stopping you from taking that next step? Could it be the attachments to old stories your ego keeps telling? Take a deep breath and ask yourself, who am I beyond what I do, what I own, or what I think I am? This question, though simple, holds the power to liberate you from years of conditioning. Nisargadatta Maharaj once said, "You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are the consciousness observing all of this." What if you spent 5 minutes today simply observing your thoughts without judgment? In that space, answers may begin to emerge. Imagine a life where you stop seeking outside what has always been within. Every choice you make and every reaction you have can come from either identification or freedom. Which will you choose? Start small. Meditate, question your assumptions, and see the world as the ocean sees its waves. What changes when you recognize that you've never been separate from the whole? If this journey has resonated with you, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Here, we continue to explore the deeper truths of who we are and how we can live more fully. So, are you ready to live as the ocean and not just as a wave?